And it was already stated in the prayer, indeed, it has been a wonderful day, a beautiful day, great opportunity for us to be together as brethren. And trust you had a good afternoon. It was a quick afternoon for us. I don't know why that was, but it was a good afternoon and wonderful to be here tonight. I want you to really think, to reflect upon the words that were just read to us by Hoyt in John's epistle, and the challenge and the charge that he gives when he says, love not the world. One of the translations, I believe that Hoyt said simply, do not love the world. Love not the world. That obviously demands a context, a contextual understanding. God gave us the world to live in. We just talked about a beautiful day we've had. Have you noticed the last couple evenings, the beautiful moon? I think they're referring to it as a super moon. And not even close to Super Bowl, so I don't know what that's all about. But it is big, and it's bright, and it's beautiful. And it's hard to believe that as you look at that and its vibrancy, that it is some 220,000 miles away. We live in a beautiful area. We often talk about that. We talk about the views, the vista that we have. We speak of the Central Coast, the kind of lifestyle that we're able to enjoy here. That we have sweltering heat of 78 degrees. And I said that for our good Tulare brethren. And so we look at this and we say, there are so many things in life that we enjoy and that we appreciate. And they're blessings from God, are they not? The food that we eat, the clothing that we wear, family and friends, relationships, things that are part of this world that, yes, we appreciate, and we have a particular fondness thereof. And yet here's the scripture saying, do not love the world. And of course, what the Apostle John is talking about as he addresses Christians is don't find yourself in a love affair with the world. Don't become so enamored by the world and what the world is trying to offer that you lose perspective of what it means to be in a right relationship with God. The world, you see, with its possessions, powers, and pleasures, is the natural concern of the natural man and woman. It is just by nature that it appeals to us. Loving the world is loving self, though. That's the warning. Loving the world is loving money. Loving the world is loving pleasure. All of this is opposed to loving God. I want you to notice a statement that Paul makes in his final epistle, the Apostle Paul, if you go to 2 Timothy, please. And if you turn your Bibles to 2 Timothy, and Paul writes this, of course, from a dungeon, from a prison cell. Death is imminent for him, he knows that. And he gives some final warnings and charges towards the evangelist Timothy, who is preaching in the city of Ephesus. But in 2 Timothy, if you'll go to chapter 3, beginning at verse 1, there Paul writes, but know this, that in the last days perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. And from such people, says Paul, turn away. You look at that list of individuals that are described in those verses, and if we have the true spiritual mindset as we should, we come to the recognition those are people we ought to turn away from and not find ourselves in a constant, daily, regular association because it's not good, it's not spiritually healthy. It's interesting. I know that as I am speaking primarily to Christians this evening, What was our condition before Jesus came into our lives? You see, before we were redeemed, Paul would state in Ephesians chapter 2 in those first few verses that before we were redeemed, we were dead in trespasses and sins. According to the course of this world, there was a time that we were following the course of this world. And we lived in the passions of our flesh. Paul had noted to the Romans and reminded them in Romans chapter 8 and verse 7 that the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. That's where our mindset had been before Jesus came into our lives. Jesus made the same point himself during his personal ministry, declaring, as you find in Matthew 6:24 in the heart of the Sermon on the Mount, when he says, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon, or God and money. Do not love the world. You see, to become a Christian is to change the mindset. When we became Christians, we changed our mindset to the things of the Spirit, not of the flesh. Why? Because we have been raised with Christ. We were raised with Christ in baptism, according to Paul, in Colossians 2 and going over into chapter 3 as well. We set our minds on the things that are above, where Christ is, and not on the things of this earth, Colossians 3, 1 and 2. We changed our thinking. We changed our mindset. And because of that, when one is truly a Christian with a spiritual mindset, the Christian is going to avoid drunkenness, lasciviousness, sexual immorality, and even something like gluttony. The Christian is going to avoid those things that are contrary to the will of God. And while we are Christians, we may have good jobs, we may have nice homes, we may have serviceable cars, you may even have a motor home, a boat, but understand that those things do not define us. And they must not be the focus of our lives. Do not love the world. But how many people are enamored by those things? It's around us all the time. I say to you that worldliness, and we may even say materialism, which goes hand in hand with worldliness, but worldliness has plagued the church in every age. We are not immune from its temptations. We are not immune from the problems and the challenges that it casts, and it continues to be among the greatest challenges that we face as Christians, and it is here that I think that it's important that we learn how to manage the world's challenges. And where I want to begin with is the world's philosophies. We have 3 points that we're going to look at tonight, and we're going to talk about philosophy and morality and even values, monetary values. But the very first thing is I want us to understand that the world's philosophies challenge our beliefs. They always have. The world's philosophies. We could ask the question, how many world philosophies are there? I spent, a couple hours easily. You know, when you're searching and doing things and doing study, the time just flies by, because one philosophy and one study led me to the next, and I like that, especially when you go online and you're talking about, and there's certain things that are highlighted and underlined, and you can just click on it and it takes you to a whole section on that. You know, most of you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I began to look, and I thought, okay, I'm going to read about these. And I had about 6, 7, or 8, perhaps, different philosophies. I thought, I want to read these. I want to look at these more closely. It's been a long time since I've taken a course in world religions and some of the philosophies back in college days, and over 35, nearly 40 years ago. And so I put a little list together. And as I was going through these, and I was burning time and energy, and then all of a sudden it dawned on me as I just looked at this brief list. of world philosophies that have existed for millennia, and in many respects, their counterparts are in existence today. And all of a sudden it dawned on me. They're basically all the same. Oh, there are a few that do stand in contrast, even if you go back and we have it listed. You know, back in the days of the Bible, you had the Stoics, and the Stoics were this very serious-minded everything, and no happiness and no joy and whatsoever, and very serious. They were Stoic. As opposed to the Epicureans, and you've all heard of an Epicurean delight, but those that believe that you just enjoy life and by trying to satisfy yourself with pleasure and having good meals and good situations. And yes, you have those kinds of contrasts, no doubt. And as some of those have become extensions of certain types of Gnosticism, and we had all the various Gnostic heresies that were in existence. But what came out of all of this, and from, again, rationalism to empiricism to idealism, and on and on and on, and finally the thought occurred to me, it all boils down, in their subtle differences, it all boils down to this. They're nothing more than branches of two things: atheism and agnosticism. With atheism, there is no God. And so what do? You go to self. And you can rationalize anything. Or when we talk about secular humanism today, we put man at the center. And when you look at all of these kinds of things that exist, so with atheism, there is no God. Now, with others who are not willing to say that it's necessarily atheistic, but it's agnosticism. And what is agnosticism? They're simply saying that the existence of God cannot be proved one way or the other. And so atheism says no God, and agnosticism simply says no knowing. But you know what it all comes down to? Really, you know what it all comes down to? No accountability. Do you hear what I'm saying? We question the existence of God, or we deny the existence of God. We put self at the center. We make our philosophy, we make our religion, we make our sense of morals, those that are moralists, and we have those that believe or belong to moralism today, and those that have decided what is the greater good, or might is right, or whatever the case is. But here's what I'm here to tell you, is that when you look at all of these, and you can study these, and I tell you, I looked at them, and first of all, you have to wade through the gobbledygook. You really do. But it all comes down to this: no accountability. People that don't want to stand before God admit that He's there and give an account of who we are before God. Turn over to I'm sorry, I don't know what happened there. Oh, I hit the wrong thing. That's what happened there. Let's see if I can get back to where I was. I don't know. We've been having problems with our, you'll see that message every now and again. Let's get back to this. There we are, we're back on. Why don't you turn over to Romans chapter 1, though. Romans chapter 1. And you speak about the Gentiles and those, that mindset that did not want to embrace the existence of God, of the true God, and turned to paganism, idolatry, immorality of all sorts. But in reading in some of this, beginning of verse 18 of Romans 1, the Apostle Paul, and I'm going to tell you right now that Paul, he had to face some of this thought. Many of these philosophies back in that day. And he says, for the wrath of God, in verse 18, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For His invisible attributes, namely His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. For For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, and birds, and animals, and creeping things. Therefore God gave them up in the lust of their hearts to impurity, to dishonoring their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. Well, stop. He'll deal with the immorality in verses 26 and on. In just a couple of moments, we will deal with that. But what we've got to understand is that they're without excuse. And they can debate and talk about all these issues all day long. But what does the world offer them? Meaningless. Absolutely meaningless in life. That we live and we die. And those in existentialism, many have come to the conclusion, well, I suppose that the best way to really experience the existential experience of life is to end it yourself. And how many of these so-called great minds put a gun to their head? That's meaning? This is the lifestyle that the world's philosophies will take you to. It's what it promotes. And when we look at Colossians 2:8, no wonder the Apostle Paul said, beware. Beware lest anyone cheat you. And I'm going to tell you right now that these philosophies and many others like them, that's what they are doing. They are cheating people. They're cheating them out of good life, quality life, understanding, meaning of existence. Beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit. By the way, etymologically speaking, what does the word philosophy in its root mean? Philosophia, the love of wisdom. But you know what? They become wise in their own eyes, and the true wisdom of God goes right out the window. It's the world's philosophy, and he says, beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the tradition of men, according to the basic principles of the world. And many people are living their lives today, not according to the principles of Christ, but the baseness of this world. We have plenty of Epicureans today, by the way. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And you know what? Again, they're not taking into thought or accountability their own accountability for God. According to the basic principles of the world and not according to Christ. As Christians, we got to learn somehow to wade through this. But the best way is not necessarily to become scholarly in all of those isms, but it is for us to become simply more familiar with God's truth and the teaching of Jesus Christ. That's the answer. Managing the world's challenges. What about the world's culture challenges? The world's culture challenges our morality. You know the phrase that I use from time to time, and even teaching the teenagers, the high school class and so forth, as I've taught for years and years and years. I've been teaching the high school class consecutively now with very, very, very few short breaks, but for 35 years. From Susanville to Rosedale and Bakersfield to here. And I tell you what, I've talked openly and very frankly with a lot of these young people, and some that are here right now, and some that were young then and not quite as young as they had been, but about the frankness of sex and drug and rock and roll. And that's exactly the phrase, is sex and drugs and rock and roll. And this is what the world's culture, what it does. The fact of the matter is, modern culture glorifies sex. It just does. From premarital sex, and you think, and I tell you, it's just so openly accepted and endorsed. For us of another generation, do we remember how kind of hush-hush and whisper it was back in the 50s or the 60s? You remember you found out that a couple of people are living together, as Brother Cogdell used to say, without benefit of clergy? You think about that. But just living together and not being married? And it was scandalous. Is it scandalous today? In our culture today? I mean, it should be, but it's not. I would venture to say that the majority of people, and in whatever generations, they went over this the other day on TV, but I've lost it. The XYZ and all the other generations exist. I don't know what. I just know I'm a boomer, a baby boomer. But you know what? I would dare say that people don't even understand today, many, what fornication is. And the various forms of fornication, what that really includes, including premarital sex or extramarital, what we could refer to as adultery. Not to mention homosexuality and how much it's being endorsed and embraced today. And all of this, the modern culture, it glorifies sex and it makes it all so easily accessible through various forms of pornography, and we just see it over and over. Let me tell you, does the world's culture challenge our morality? And do you suppose that influences or impacts Christians? We know it does. By the way, the world's philosophies, they'll either condone it or they'll just ignore it when it comes to immorality. The world's philosophies, for the most part, will condone it or just ignore it as though it's really not even an issue. We are in Romans 1. Are you still there in Romans chapter 1? You probably went over to Colossians, and that's fine. But if you go back to Romans 1, and we left off, by the way, we'll look at verses 26 and 27, and then we're going to see verse 32. But in Romans 1:26, he says, "For this reason," Paul writes, "God gave them up to dishonorable passions, for their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature." It's talking about lesbianism. Do we get that? "And the men," in homosexuality, "the men likewise gave up natural relations with women, and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless act with men, and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error." You know, the modern culture and philosophy today say, oh, no. That is the skewed view of an apostle Paul. Besides that, he was a bigot, and he was a woman hater, and he was, you know all the things that Paul's been accused of being? When you read the literature? And they don't understand that Paul, what he's saying, represent what God taught and said in the patriarchal age of Genesis 19, and what the law of Moses taught very clearly in Leviticus 18, chapters 18 and 19, and what Jesus himself taught about immorality in Matthew 5, and what the Apostle Paul deals with in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, what he deals with in Romans 1, what he deals with in 1 Timothy 1, and you can look in all the words, and I've done it, and I've done extensive studies in all of the words that deal with homosexuality and with sodomy and the whole 9 yards, if you will. I'm going to tell you right now, modern day culture defies what the Bible teaches about it. And we're considered as being biased and bigots. Or they just ignore it. And remember what the Apostle Paul said, and let me put these verses down with immorality. In Romans chapter 1 and verse 32, he says, if you're still in that text, though they know God's decree that those who practice, look at it. Though they know God's decree, here's God's commandment, what God says about it, they know God's decree that those who practice such things, we just read about it, deserve to die. They not only do them, but give approval, in some translations say hearty approval to those who practice them. My brethren and friends, it's not just sinful to specifically practice those sins, it is sinful to turn a blind eye and to approve those. Do we see that? And in Ephesians 5:11, Paul says, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but do what? Rather expose them. Expose them for what they are. And before we go to our final point, you talk about modern culture, and this has been an extension of the glorification of sex. It really has been, and that is the abortion problem. And you talking about an equivocation today. Abortion is equivocated as the, quote, woman's right over her own body instead of being understood as premeditated murder. Life. You know, it's been debated in years past is when does life begin? And even those that are pro-abortion, and they think, well, is it accessible? It's okay in the first trimester. Well, probably okay in the second trimester. With some questions about the third trimester, and it doesn't make any difference. And when you look at that, and all I can tell you is that on March 7th, a 26-week-old baby by the name of Finn Watkins was delivered in an emergency C-section. 26 weeks. A 6-month baby. And you're going to talk to me about the viability of life? David said in the 139th Psalm in verse 13, for you formed my inward parts, you covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Your eyes saw my substance yet being unformed, and in your book they are all written, the days fashioned for me when as of yet there were none of them. Does God know us in the womb? God knows us before the womb. So it doesn't make any difference. I'm here to tell you, and you may be having philosophy teachers and sociology teachers and science teachers and other kinds of teachers telling you in colleges and universities, and I mean from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo to private schools in Pennsylvania. Do not buy into the world's view on philosophy or morality. Don't do it. Brings us to our final point, and this is a point that hits us in many interesting ways, but I say to you primarily in the pocketbook. And the world's treasures challenge our values. And I have one thing to say about all of that, is our society is spoiled rotten. Would you agree with that? I'm almost embarrassed to tell you where I've had dinner the last 2 nights and where I had lunch today. I'm not going to tell you, you can just think about it, though. Maybe ask me later. All I'm saying is look at that, and are we a blessed people? Oh. You know how I'm really blessed with it? I might pick up the tabs, but anyway, that's another issue. But we look at our society, and we look, I tell you, our society is spoiled rotten. It really is. How much do we need? Houses, automobiles, boats, stock portfolios, gold and platinum credit cards, 6- and 7-figure incomes, and the prestige that goes with them define the good life for many. And I was told today, because I don't know about all these things, except for I know what I did hear, that LeBron James was able to sign a 2-year contract to go back to Cleveland to play 2 years of basketball, to run up and down a court, and receive $47 million. And then I was told in the discussion, oh, he's not even nearly the highest paid player. I mean, you know. Earl, how many years of teaching would you have had to done to make $47 million?
12,000.
Yeah, 12,000 years. It's just as well that you didn't, Earl, you know what I mean? But anyway. How much do we need? You know, when you look at Scripture, and according to Jesus in Luke 12:15, Jesus said that one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Look at that. In fact, we'll just start reading the beginning of verse 15 of Luke 12. Good passage to read. And he said to them, and he saw some individuals that were worried about stuff. They were worried about things. They were worried about possessions. And he says to them, take heed and beware of covetousness. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses. Then he spoke a parable to them, saying, the ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops? So he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns, build greater, and there I will store all my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. Well, that's the world's philosophy, isn't it? But look at verse 20. But God said to him, fool, this night, tonight, your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. To the rich man in this parable, the Lord says, fool. Paul warned in 1 Timothy chapter 6. He warned in verse 10, the passage that we know quite well, where it says, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith. He's warning about Christians. Some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Do any of you remember back in the 1970s, and I'll go ahead and use the title that he used, although I do not use it with any respect whatsoever, but just the title. Do any of you remember a television preacher who was based out of Manhattan but went nationwide, and his name was Reverend Ike? Anybody remember that except for me? Thank you, Beth. You're just aging yourself with me, I guess. But I was listening to him preach on the television one night. This was probably about the mid-70s. Oh, I mean an auditorium filled with people. Back in the time, you could tell, man, he was wearing $500-$600 suits back in the 70s. Gold rings and diamonds and chains and so forth, and I mean, he looked slick. And you looked out, and man, were they dressed up. What do they say, dressed to the nines? Like they just stepped out of a bandbox, going back to some of the old-time expressions, right? He's preaching health and wealth gospel. Boy, you give yourself to Jesus, and you just give and give and give. And when he meant give yourself to Jesus, he had dollar signs in mind. And then I'm telling you what, I'll never forget this. I will never, ever forget this. We'll never forget this. It's the world in which we live. But he says, the Apostle Paul said, when the Apostle Paul said in 1 Timothy 6:10, for the love of money is the root of all evil, he said the Apostle Paul was wrong. He should have said the lack of money is the root of all evil. And the audience just applauded. And the money poured in. Paul says, if you look in that text, but back up to verse 6, now godliness with contentment is great gain. That's a subject we don't always like. We were having lunch at the old Galley restaurant back in the mid-1990s, and I was going to be preaching on contentment. that evening, we're having lunch on Sunday afternoon, and a couple of fellows that I'd visit with there a lot, would go and see them all the time, and the one fellow, he always asked me about church services, what are you preaching on tonight? And I said, tonight I'm actually preaching a lesson on contentment. He goes, oh, I don't think I'd like that lesson. Now, godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out, and having food and clothing, with these we shall be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and in many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. But you, O man of God, flee these things and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, gentleness. And he goes on to even tell them later on in verses 17 and 18 that charge those who are rich in this world not to put their trust in uncertain riches, but in the mighty living God. How much do we need? And what is contentment? We have to manage the world's challenges because we live in this world that we're told not to love. And yet we're faced with this every day. We've got to manage it. The Apostle Peter told Christians, as we close in 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 15, he says, but as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct. And we need to be concerned a whole lot more with holiness than what the world offers. Make no mistake, holiness is incompatible with the love of the world. We cannot do both. Can't have it both ways. So I hope that as we look at this week and the week to come, and we're challenged by the world, that we're going to do a good job of taking Bible in hand in association with Christians and brethren, and we're going to manage it the best we can. Can we help you in your need tonight? Is there any here that would need to come to Christ? Any here that would need to make some changes? Any here that just needs to be strengthened? Let us know. Let us help you. We offer you the invitation of Christ, and if you're ready to become a Christian tonight, we're ready to help you with that as well. But as the song of invitation is going to give us, going to make the challenge of who will follow Jesus, let's follow Jesus, not the world. If we can help you, won't you come at this time as we stand and sing the song?